The oily stench of rotten fish guts and stagnant low-tide mud choked the night air inside the Syrtis imperial harbour. Against the green wooden pilings of the dark pier, the black water lapped with a rhythmic slapping sound against the hulls of the moored barges. Inside a small wooden shack at the edge of the dock, a heavy velvet pouch clicked softly against a scarred desk. A wealthy merchant pushed the coin forward. The harbour master, whose blue uniform was frayed at the cuffs, looked out the grease-stained window. Outside, a low-slung carrack slipped past the stone breakwater without lanterns, its dark timbers creaking softly in the damp chill. Months ago, the prince had redirected the port security budget to buy iron and cement for his desert project. Now, the harbour master could no longer afford to pay his night watchman or maintain the formal inspection scales. He took the pouch, pulled his woolen coat tight against the sea chill, and signed the blank manifest. Outside, through the mist, came the sounds of men cursing in low whispers as silent crews began unloading unmarked crates of specialized brass valves into waiting wagons. The heavy iron wagons did not slip out of the city unnoticed. Moving at dawn, the flatbeds rumbled loudly over the stone streets, each one pulled by a straining team of 12 oxen whose hooves threw up thick clouds of grey dust. On the narrow sidewalks, the citizens of Syrtis watched the convoy pass with silent, bitter hatred. Women holding thin children turned their backs, old men stared with hollow despair at the high-grade timber and raw iron rolling out toward the waste. The prince's secret project had stripped the city bare. Every local smithy had been requisitioned to forge pipe brackets, every spare log had been seized for trench bracing. The cost of basic tools had tripled, and the price of grain had skyrocketed because the army had bought up every beast of burden to haul the cargo inland. The endless rumbling of the iron wheels was the sound of the city's starvation. Within days, the coastal humidity vanished, replaced by the dry heat of the Great Dune Sea. For 4 years, while the desert city outcasts were quietly stacking shale in the Iron Cleft gorge, this brutal scar had been creeping across the red sand. The strategy was mechanical and merciless. The desert spanned 80 miles, a 4-day military march, requiring exactly 4 major supply caches placed 18 miles apart to sustain an invading army. Under normal funding, imperial engineers constructed 1 buried cache per year, sinking 12-foot-deep vertical pits into the shifting sand to bury massive iron cisterns. Surrounding each well, they built timber-lined vaults packed with dried grain and extra weapons, marking each site above ground with a single stone sentinel pillar. Linking these outposts together was the pipeline itself, miles of interlocking iron tubes laid in shallow trenches, designed to pump water from the coastal aquifers straight into the arid heart of the enemy's border hills. At the center of the forward staging camp, a massive silk pavilion blocked the white glare of the midday sun. Inside, the air smelled of imported rosewater, melting beeswax, and cold wine. Jash'an, now the imperial treasurer, dipped his quill into dark ink, neatly altering a digit on a thick calfskin ledger. Beside him, Saffron, the self-appointed logistics master, peeled a fat fig with a silver knife. The campaign was in severe crisis. The construction of the 4th and final cache, located just 18 miles from the border hills, had ground to a halt. The advisors had skimmed so much wealth from the engineering contracts over the 4-year project that the royal treasury had run dry. Prince Saffron looked at his shaking hands. The tremor was inside his chest as well. Doubt filled his mind. What was he doing? He felt his father's disapproving eyes on him even now. He realized he was still trying to impress a dead man. The treasury was down to the last few chests of gold. In 4 years, he had spent the wealth his father had accumulated over decades. Were the gods really demanding this from him? He felt so out of touch. He used his last heaven's milk yesterday evening. He turned suddenly and stepped into the pavilion, dark rings under his eyes, his fingers twitching against his gold-embroidered sash. He pointed a trembling hand through the open flap toward the eastern peaks, where the unnatural purple clouds were swirling. "Why does the water not flow yet?" Saffron demanded. "This final cache is taking 2 years to finish instead of 1. Saffron set his knife down, his face instantly smoothing into deep reverence. "Patience, my lord." The desert sand resisted the stone footings, the logistics master lied smoothly. "But the final sentinel pillar is anchored. Your divine march will not be delayed. Haman Jash'an saw the tremor in the prince's hand. Would you like some more of the heaven's milk, my lord? He asked, offering a decorated box containing 3 vials. Saffron nodded vaguely, hating himself for wanting the milk while he took the box and stepped back out into the sun to stare at the sky. Scylla waited until the prince was out of earshot. What is that heaven's milk you offer so freely, Haman? Haman dipped his quill to double the reported labor expenses to recoup their gold, and said, I asked the high priest of the Syrtis desert gods to mix the milk of the bloodflowers with sugar, cinnamon, and saffron to create a drinkable mixture for the prince to add to his date wine. Just outside the silk partition, in the narrow strip of shade cast by the heavy canvas, stood Kaelan. The young servant held a silver tray, his arms shaking from hours of standing at attention. The heat outside the tent was a physical blow, baking the red earth until the air vibrated with a shimmering mirage. Fat, blowflies buzzed loudly around the edges of the pavilion, attracted by the scent of spilt wine and rotting garbage dumped at the edge of the clearing. Kaelan's throat was parched, coated in a fine layer of bitter red dust, but his eyes were fixed entirely on a small side table just 3 feet away. On it sat a half-eaten loaf of white bread and a small cluster of bruised grapes, the discarded scraps of the advisor's lunch. Kaelan's stomach knotted with a dull ache. Back in the lower slums of Syrtis, his family lived on watered grain because the prince's pipeline taxes had doubled the price of flour. The scraps on that table could feed his daughter for 2 days. He calculated the distance to the guard standing at the edge of the tent. The soldier was leaning heavily against a wooden post, his leather armor dark with sweat, his eyes half closed from the oppressive heat. If Kaelan reached for the bread and got caught, the penalty for stealing from an imperial table was the loss of a hand, followed by a permanent sentence to the pipeline trenches. It was a death sentence. He looked at the advisors laughing inside the cool silk tent, then at the dry crust of bread melting in the heat. He shifted his weight, his fingers tightening on the edge of the silver tray, balancing the survival of his daughter against the cold iron of the executioner's blade. The high sandstone ridge vanished and reappeared as Master trekked into the desert. The Great Dune Sea did not possess the flat uniformity of the salt pan. It was a fluid, living landscape of massive, crescent-shaped waves of red sand that groaned loudly under the midnight wind. Master traveled light, carrying only his canvas field jacket, 3 leather waterskins, and his steel staff. To an untrained civilian eye, this arid waste appeared entirely dead, but as he walked deeper into the basin, tracking the coordinates of the distant firelight, the desert revealed its ancient, minimalist infrastructure. The ecosystem functioned through a network of specialized, prehistoric survivors, using a blueprint that had resisted extinction for millions of years. Near the base of the massive slip faces, tiny golden moles with no functional eyes swam effortlessly through the loose sand just beneath the surface, hunting nocturnal beetles. Most remarkable were the ancient, 2-leafed perennials anchored into the rocky gravel plains between the dunes. Their pair of strap-like leaves were split by centuries of desert gales into a mass of tangled, weathered ribbons. They drew their moisture purely from the heavy fog that drifted over the dunes at dawn, holding the gravel beds together with roots that sank 50 feet into the parched earth. On the 3rd morning, his inquisitiveness betrayed him. Master stopped to examine the trunk of one of these living fossils, marveling at how its ancient lineage survived without a drop of rain, when shadows fell over him. 4 Syrtis imperial scouts surrounded Master with rust-pitted spears, their faces hollow and hostile. Master did not resist. They bound his wrists behind his back with rough hemp rope and dragged him back to their comrades at the camp. They dumped him at the base of a single stone sentinel pillar. The Syrtis scouts were a miserable, sun-blinded skeleton crew dressed in stained crimson tunics, their leather breastplates cracked and salt-crusted from sweat. Because the construction project had ground to a halt while the advisors scrambled for gold, these men had been left behind in the baking heat for 3 months with nothing to do but complain. They viewed their prisoner as a harmless vagrant, an eccentric wanderer carrying a metal stick. The soldiers spoke freely before him, their voices thick with exhaustion and deep resentment. "The prince is mad," a scar-faced corporal muttered, spitting into the red sand. He swatted a metallic blowfly from his neck. "He stares at the purple clouds while we rot in this furnace." They say the treasury is so dry the logistics master had to pay for the iron rivets out of his own vault. He will get it back, an older soldier grunted, sharpening a short blade on a piece of sandstone. The advisors double the ledger lines every time a wagon drops an axle. They are robbing the palace blind while we guard a dry well. The pipeline has not moved a yard in months. Saffron wants the water to flow by rise of the winter constellation, the corporal countered, looking nervously toward the horizon where the purple storms bruised the sky. The forward edge is only 18 miles from the border hills. We are right on top of the border, and we do not even have enough grain to feed a mule. I do not know how we will be able to launch an invasion on empty stomachs. Master sat quietly in the shadow of the pillar, listening to the cascade of information. He noted the exact location of the subterranean hatch, the structural thickness of the iron valves, and the profound lack of morale among the garrison. When darkness fell, the desert heat broke instantly, replaced by a deep chill. The guards retreated into their leather tents to escape the wind, leaving a shivering watchman by the campfire. The man's eyes were half closed, his chin resting against his chest. Escaping did not require violence. Master waited until the guard snored. He raked his staff closer with his feet and slid the hidden blade out a few inches. The sharp edge cut the rope like it was cake. He stood up without a sound, the fine sand muffling his boots. He retrieved his water bags from the base of the stone pillar, slipped past the sleeping watchman, and dissolved into the dark red shadows of the dunes. It took Master 2 days of steady pacing to trek back to the Iron Cleft. Gideon, Captain Joshua, and Mose were waiting by the primary step dam. Master sat down on a flat shale slab, accepted a wooden cup of fresh water from Rose, and looked directly at the captain. "We have a problem," Master told them, his voice rough from the dust. "Someone called Prince Saffron is planning to invade Orosia, and he plans to enter through our gorge. His engineers have built an 80-mile pipeline across the dunes. They have 4 major supply caches spaced about 18 miles apart. The final outpost sits right outside our door, just 18 miles east of the Iron Cleft." Silence met this news. Rose swallowed. Mary's arms instinctively wrapped around herself again. Even Mose looked worried at the Dune Sea. Joshua's hand went instinctively to his spear hilt, his veteran eyes narrowing. "How many men?" 10 at the forward outpost, Master replied. "They are starved, angry, and completely demotivated. The prince's treasury is empty because his chief advisors are skimming the military contracts. The project has stalled because of their greed." "Then we have time," Gideon said, his mason's hand tightening around his iron chisel. "Not much," Master warned, setting the wooden cup down. "The advisors are funding the final phase with their own stolen gold to keep the prince from checking the books. They are forcing the laborers to finish the connection before winter. If that pipeline reaches the hills, Saffron will bypass the royal border forts entirely and dump an army right into this valley." Master looked up at the sandstone cliffs above them, then at the sturdy stone walls they had spent 4 years building. "What do you all think about building a defensive wall across the throat of the gorge? Just like we build the dam walls to keep the water back, we can build a wall to keep enemies out." "That will work," said Gideon, "but we will have to cut bigger blocks to build higher. We will have to excavate the sandstone above our camp." Master stayed quiet for a moment, then said, "I have been thinking about something else. I was wondering, what if we carve houses into the escarpment above our tents? Our tents are adequate protection, but we still get wet and very cold in winter, and in summer we fry like raisins in the sun. If we build it right, the wet will not come inside, and the temperature will be stable. Cooler in summer and retain the heat of our fires longer in winter. If we are going to excavate blocks for the defense wall, why not use the same effort to build cliff houses?" The others looked at him with disbelief. Glib's knee-jerk cynicism found its voice first. "Has the desert fried your brain, Master?" Master smiled. "If we can build 3 dams, why can't we build good houses for ourselves? We use the same tools. The only difference is that we use the space from which we take the blocks." "Yes, but it also means we need to plan very carefully what we take and where we take it from," said Maelkai. "Glib is good at planning," answered Rose. And can we not bring the water from the dams to us with canals as they do it in the city? The wind inside the Iron Cleft carried the metallic smell of wet stone as the autumn rains began to drill into the canyon floor. Master stood at the base of the massive northern cliff, using the heavy steel cap of his staff to scrape a long, straight line through the damp grey moss. Gideon and Mose stood beside him, their clothes damp, watching the tip of the metal rod reveal the clean, cream-coloured rock beneath the surface. "The mountain is built in shelves," Master explained, his finger tracing a thin, dark band of compacted granite that ran horizontally above their heads. "This dark layer is hard granite. It blocks water and resists the chisel. But the layer beneath it is soft sandstone. If we cut straight into the sandstone, the granite shelf above will act as a natural roof beam. We do not need timber props. The mountain is already holding its own weight." Gideon wiped a splatter of water from his eye, his rough fingers touching the groove Master had cut. "How deep can we go before the ceiling cracks?" 16 feet wide for each chamber, Master replied, his voice level and certain. "But we must cut the ceilings in a smooth, continuous arch. A flat ceiling will buckle under the weight of the upper ridge, but a curved arch pushes the vertical pressure outward into the solid rock walls." "Mose, will you help Gideon? First, clear the small pieces into a pile close to where we are going to build the wall. Then, we need your strength to move the big blocks." The giant nodded, his massive shoulders straightening as he lifted his heavy iron mallet. Within an hour, the rhythmic, metallic ring of chisels echoed through the gorge, striking a steady cadence against the stone as the outcasts began to hollow out their sanctuary. 12 feet into the first chiseled corridor, the mountain gave them a gift. Mose had just hauled a block away when Master's chisel punched a hole through a difficult piece of granite. Master and Gideon froze to listen if the mountain moved, but only cold air escaped. As he pulled out the chisel, light escaped with the air. Carefully, they widened the hole, hearts hammering with anticipation. What they found was a huge cavern. Millions of years ago, a gas bubble was sealed by cooling granite deep underground. Over the following millions of years, tectonic forces pushed the granite upward into the mountain on which they lived. Over time, the desert deposits sand over the granite pocket. Pressure and minerals cement the desert sand into sandstone, creating a secondary seal over the original granite pocket. They stepped into the cavern with awe. The roof had fallen in on the far side of the cavern, allowing the sun to shine in. Plants had started to grow where sunlight and rain kept them alive. "The mountain loves us," Glib whispered. His eyes brimmed with tears as, for the first time in his life, he received a gift out of nowhere. What would have taken a year to complete was completed in a few months. The outcasts used the fallen rocks from the roof to build private chambers for themselves. The huge boulders were chiseled down and dragged out to build the defense wall. They kept the communal fireplace where everybody gathered in the evening. This time, there were stone tables for Rose to work on, and Gideon built her a stove to stand next to. Master guided Tobias, Glib and the blacksmith in cutting a narrow, deep trench along the base of the cave floors. This channel connected directly to the primary overflow pool of the third step dam, which, it turned out, was the closest to the cavern. The gradient was calculated with meticulous precision, a drop of just 1 inch for every 20 feet of length. This slight slope ensured the mountain water moved constantly but silently, preventing the current from eroding the soft sandstone bed. The effect on the subterranean air was amazing. The continuous flow of cold mountain water created a natural ventilation loop that kept the underground chambers crisp, dry, and smelling of fresh rain. The outcasts no longer slept in the slick mud of the open canyon. They moved their hide bedding inside, safe from the freezing night winds. The heat of their fires stayed longer, and their firewood lasted longer. The transition to dry, sheltered living did not go smoothly. Squabbles over whose chambers went where erupted. Some wanted to be near the water, some closer to the entrance. Malachi listened frustratedly to everybody trying to be more important than the others. Then, in his temple voice, which sounded very impressive in the enclosed space of the cavern, he ordered them to stop. "What has gotten into you?" he asked. "For years, We have been working as equals next to each other. Now you bring the city's poisonous hierarchy in, just as we all are safe and protected." Suddenly conscious of their behavior, everybody looked down. Then Tobias suggested, "Let's build our chambers closest to our tasks. For example, Rose and Becca's rooms should be close to the kitchen, and Joshua's should be closest to the entrance." A few weeks after they had moved in, Master stopped, surprised. Watching Rose and the two sisters, Kat and Tay, break up the compacted dirt with short wooden hose. They channeled the tail end of the gravity aqueduct into a series of shallow, circular irrigation rings around a soil bed. Tobias came forward carefully, his scarred arms cradling 3 fragile, green saplings Andrew had smuggled in for him from the city. They were wild desert olives and stunted pomegranates, prehistoric, hardy varieties that could survive on minimal moisture. He set the first root ball into the moist silt, patted the earth firmly with his callous stumps, and watched the clear water from the gravity channel seep slowly into the dry dirt. "The silt from the winter floods has settled here for 1,000 years, Tobias explained, kicking a clump of the dark, damp earth. "It is full of minerals from the upper peaks. The sun hits this floor long enough during the day, and the rock walls will trap the heat long after the sun sets. It is a perfect incubator." By evening, 7 distinct trees stood planted in the subterranean light. The hidden orchard was completely invisible from the outside desert, insulated from the scorching summer sun and the freezing winter frosts. It was the first permanent seed of a self-sustaining economy, anchored deep within the bone of the mountain. The rhythmic clink of iron chisels vanished from the sandstone caves, replaced by the sharp, echoing crunch of well-bred horses pacing through the gravel at the throat of the gorge. Lord Julian, the pampered son of Duke Marcus, rode into the Iron Cleft at the head of 6 mounted retainers. The soldiers wore polished silver breastplates and fine lavender sashes, their pristine gear a stark contrast to the rugged terrain. Julian held a silk handkerchief to his nose. He expected to look down upon the filthy, cowering outcasts he had seen on the salt pan years prior. Instead, his horse emerged into a vibrant, structured sanctuary. Clear, cold water flowed silently through neat stone channels. The outcasts stood up from a wall they were building. Their bodies were healthy and well-fed on winter catfish and wild grains. They did not flinch or look at the ground. They stood quietly and confidently, watching the nobility with steady eyes. Julian pulled his horse to a halt near the entrance of a cave. "What is this?" he demanded, his voice thin and petulant as he gestured with a leather riding crop toward the wall being built. "You were sent to this ditch to rot, Captain, not to build a private wall." Joshua did not move, but his posture remained rigid. "My lord, Prince Saffron is building a pipeline across the desert. He wants to invade Orosia through the Iron Gorge. The closest scouts sit less than 18 miles past the salt pan. We are building this wall to secure the valley." Julian let out a sharp, mocking laugh, throwing his head back. "An empire pipeline in the deep sand? Do not invent fairy tales, old man. Where is your camp? Bring me some water." When Rose exited the cave with a cup of water for the Duke's son, he spurred his horse forward, shouldered her to the ground and entered the cavern. His horse's hooves clamped loudly in the stone corridor. He stopped. His expression turned from disgust to deep, envious disbelief. He looked at the neat stone structures, then to the hidden orchard. He felt the cool, clear air on his desert-baked skin. Riding out again, disregarding Mary who was trying to help Rose up, he ordered, "These caves are built on royal territory. By order of my father, the vanguard will occupy these chambers by nightfall. Move your people back into the mud where they belong. We are taking these homes because they please us." Master had left the cavern before sunrise to scout the desert from the cliffs. He arrived back at the settlement to see Lord Julian order water. The arrogance of the young lord irked him. But he held back. He did not want to take away the power to stand against a bully from the outcasts. He felt a warm pride in his chest when he saw them looking up. Their postures radiated their sense of self-worth. But when the Lord's retainers stepped their horses forward to herd the outcasts away from the cavern, a slow anger started to rise inside him. He felt Vhagar step forward in him. They both mobilized the need to protect. Step back. The voice did not come from the crowd. It rose from the dark entrance of one of the canal outflows. Master stepped into the midday light, his steel staff resting lightly in his right hand, his canvas jacket white with sandstone dust. His presence caused Julian's horse to rear back with a sudden, frightened snort. Julian steadied his mount, his face flushing red with anger. "Who are you to command nobility, peasant? Guards, clear this vagrant from my path." Master did not raise his staff. He simply lifted his head, looking straight into Julian's eyes. Inside the matrix of Master's mind, the quiet builder stepped aside, and Vhagar surged forward to the front. The warrior soul did not draw a weapon. He simply projected the raw, terrifying gravity of a commander who had broken armies and conquered stars. Master's physical eyes seemed to darken, reflecting a cold, predatory vacuum that made the air inside the narrow gorge instantly feel thin and freezing. The two closest retainers froze, their boots halfway out of their stirrups, their hands locking onto their reins as a primal survival instinct screamed at them to halt. Master took a single, measured step forward. The steel cap of his staff struck the sandstone floor with a heavy, resonant thud that seemed to vibrate through the horse's legs. "Your vanguard will not spend the night in these caves," Master said, his voice dropping into a flat, iron frequency that echoed off the high cliff walls. "You have never seen a winter flood in these mountains, and you have never looked into the eyes of the entity marching through the deep sand. You are a child playing with land you do not understand. Turn your horses around, ride back to the court, and go tell your king of the advancing enemy." Julian opened his mouth to order an execution, but the words choked in his throat. Staring into Master's cold, unblinking gaze, the young lord felt a sudden, suffocating panic, the absolute certainty that if his men drew their steel, they would not survive the afternoon. Without a word, Julian violently jerked his horse's reins, spraying loose gravel over his own guards as he turned his mount and fled down the canyon path, his terrified retainers riding hard to keep pace behind him. The air inside the grand chamber had grown thick with tension. Lord Julian sat on a marble bench near the front row, his face pale, his hands trembling as he stared fixedly at his own polished boots. Beside him, Duke Marcus stood tall, his lavender silk robes shaking with artificial outrage as he hammered a clenched fist against the marble balustrade. "This is open treason, Your Majesty!" Marcus shouted, his voice echoing off the high vaulted ceiling. "The vagrant did not merely refuse my son entry to royal lands, he threatened a lord of the realm with dark, unnatural sorcery. My son's retainers, trained imperial veterans, were paralyzed by some foul, invisible force. This rebel has built a fortress in the sandstone, and he is using the outcasts to forge a private army. I demand a full military brigade be dispatched immediately to clear that gorge and execute the leadership." The assembly of nobles erupted into a low, frantic murmur. Several generals nodded in agreement, their hands resting on their ceremonial sword hilts, their eyes fixed on the king, waiting for the command to march. Captain Joshua stepped forward into the center of the floor, the sharp click of his iron knee brace cutting through the nobleman's chatter. He did not look at Duke Marcus. He stood before the king, his single arm held straight at his side, his posture completely unyielding. "The stranger used no sorcery, my lord," Joshua said, his voice flat, steady, and loud enough to silence the room. "He used nothing but his eyes." Lord Julian fled because he is a child who has never looked into the face of a real commander. He went to the Iron Cleft expecting to find broken, starving cripples crawling in the mud. Instead, he found a community of dignified, self-reliant people living in clean, vaulted homes. He found an infrastructure he could not comprehend, and it terrified him. "They are squatters on crown land." Marcus countered sharply, his eyes narrowing into slits. "They have hollowed out royal stone without a license. They have redirected mountain water that belongs to the province. By every law of Orosia, that infrastructure is a crime." "The water belongs to the land, Duke," Joshua replied, turning slowly to face the nobleman for the first time. "And the outcasts built those channels with their own sweat and blood while your treasury officials were busy reassigning the port guards to accept bribes from the southern merchants." A sudden, suffocating silence dropped over the courtroom. Duke Marcus froze, his hand remaining mid-air, his face turning an unwholesome, mottled shade of red. From the throne, the king's voice emerged, deep and dangerously quiet. "Explain yourself, Captain." 4 weeks ago, before the winter snows blocked the northern passes, the stranger the Duke is accusing of treason intercepted a private dispatch carried by one of Duke Marcus's personal couriers, Joshua explained, drawing a sealed, ink-stained parchment from inside his blue linen tunic. He did not hand it to the Duke. He stepped forward and placed it directly onto the royal clerk's desk. "This is not a military report, Your Majesty," Joshua continued, his voice ringing with absolute clarity. "These are architectural blueprints drafted by the Duke's private surveyors. They do not show fortifications, and they do not detail a rebel uprising. They are structural layouts for an expansive, private mountain estate, a luxury desert resort featuring private bathhouses, terrace gardens, and stone villas designed exclusively for the high nobility of Orosia." The murmur in the hall did not return. The silence was absolute. "The Duke never cared about a rebellion," Joshua said, his gaze locking onto Marcus with cold contempt. His surveyors discovered that the stranger had successfully tamed the flash floods. They saw that the 3-tier step dams had turned a barren, muddy ditch into a permanent, lush paradise with a constant supply of fresh water. "The Duke does not want to send a brigade to protect your borders, Your Majesty. He wants to send an execution squad to slaughter the disabled outcasts, clear the canyon, and seize the stranger's brilliant engineering so he can sell water rights and luxury holiday estates to the wealthy lords sitting on these very benches." At the same time, he kept silent about the encroaching invasion. The king did not speak immediately. The scratch of a clerk's quill was the only sound in the vast marble hall. The tall silhouette of the monarch rose slowly from his throne. He walked silently towards Duke Marcus, stopped a foot in front of him and looked flatly into the Duke's eyes. Duke Marcus cowered before the imposing figure, trying to find a place to look that was not the cold eyes of the monarch. Sweat formed on his forehead. "You knew of the invasion a year before it happened and chose not to tell me about it," the king growled. "As of this moment, you are no longer a duke." Guards. Kalen had made a plan. He had discussed it with his friend, Mud, the ox cart driver. Mud agreed the plan could work. It was dangerous, but if they were careful, their families could eat again. The plan was to keep the containers the food came in. When cleaning up the scraps, Kalen would throw them back into the container rather than into the ditch at the end of the camp. If asked what he was doing, he would say it was to keep the flies away. Mud would then hide the container under the empty burlap sacks and take it back to the city. Kalen wondered if the servants in Orosia also needed to smuggle food to their families. That same night, 100 miles east, Haman Jash'an unsealed a private letter from his brother-in-law. The foundries had produced the final valve casings. The last shipment left the harbour on the morning tide. The fourth cache would be complete before the winter constellation rose.